Hi, Ben. Thank you for coming. I just wanted to ask, what is your view on the fact that bans on abortion do lead to about a 21% increase in pregnancy-related deaths when you hold that your views on abortion and abortion bans are based in the fact that you have a desire to protect life and save lives because every human being is made in God's image?
Because I think we're going to have a fundamental disconnect here. The entire abortion debate is centered on whether indeed an unborn child or a human life with potential is in fact that, or if it is just a ball of cells. If you believe that there is inherent value to a fetus, then I am seeking to preserve that life as well as the life of the mother. If you look at the raw numbers in terms of, for example, in the United States, 1 million abortions a year, let's assume that laws banning abortion in the United States were universal, those 1 million abortions go away tomorrow. That's an effective law, the abortions go away, but there's also a concomitant increase in the number of women who are seeking back alley abortions, for example. There's a concomitant increase in the number of women who are dying in pregnancy-related childbirth. That would not be 1 million. That would be a lot lower than 1 million, because 1 million women out of 1 million women, that would suggest that 1 million abortions would, if brought to term, 1 million of those women would die. That's obviously not true. So for me, an abortion prevented is a life saved. And you have to weigh that against what you're talking about, which is the life of the mother when it comes to a pregnancy. Now, even as a fan of pro-life position, and I'm a deeply pro-life person, I still have an exception for the life of the mother. So if the life of the mother is endangered by a pregnancy, then abortion would be legal. That's true for every pro-lifer in the United States, by the way, including the most pro-life people, including me. So, I think that in order to make the argument that you're making, you would have to assume that there is no cost to abortion remaining legal in terms of lives lost.
Okay, so you're doing it on a utilitarian basis.
I'm doing it on a lives saved basis, yes.
Well, yeah, so a utilitarian basis,
sure.
Right. So then if you look at comprehensive sex education, which the US does not have, a lot of people in rural areas don't have any form of sex education. You yourself have said, and I quote, on a general level, I don't think that teachers should be talking about sex in the classroom with kids at all at any age. It's shown that comprehensive and correct sex education reduces rates of abortion and teen pregnancy. So then if your goal is to save lives, why do you not support comprehensive sex education? Because it seems like your goal is something else.
No, because these first of all, I would like to see the studies that you're citing in support of that
that study
idea.
Is the University of Washington.
Okay,
study.
And there are plenty of other studies in the United States that suggest essentially no difference in, for example, unwed pregnancy in the United States.
Can I have those studies?
What can you have them? You can look at the pregnancy rates in California, New York, Massachusetts.
I just gave you my reference.
I mean, I'm happy to email you references if you so choose. But to say, I mean, this does happen to be a topic where there is social science on both sides. I'm not saying that the study that you're citing is invalid. I'm just suggesting that there is a difference in data methods, and I'm suggesting that the single motherhood rates in the West with comprehensive sex education are miles higher than they were in, say, the 1950s when there was not comprehensive sex education. So obviously that has not militated against the amount of unwed pregnancy happening in society. So the idea that the cure-all here is comprehensive sex ed, if you could prove to me, let's put it this way, if you could prove to me that comprehensive sex ed did result in lower levels of abortion, lower levels of unwed pregnancy, and that it was values neutral, comprehensive sex ed, in the sense that what it was actually teaching is, here is how to prevent a pregnancy without ending it in abortion, then I actually don't have a huge problem with that. It depends on the age at which you're teaching kids. There are other issues that I have with comprehensive sex ed, including the fact that what is taught is not the simple biology of sex and how to prevent a pregnancy. Comprehensive sex ed simply goes a lot further than that, and I have serious moral problems with that.
It seems like you're just trying to force women into motherhood, not save lives.
And I mean, just to respond briefly to that, I'm confused as to the very language of forcing women into motherhood suggests that in a vast majority of cases in which women get pregnant, they had no part in the actual pregnancy-making act, which is not true. I've done nothing. When you get, if you or any of your friends get pregnant, that is generally not having anything to do with me per se. So I'm confused as to why I would want you to force anything.
Hello. Hi, Ben.
All right.
That was amusing.
Yeah. You know, credit where credit's due. The last line was funny, although I think he's still missing the point. So, like, I do. I mean, in a sense, like the first part, the sort of response to her pointing out the loss of life. He said a couple things in response, and one of them I think was sort of like very unserious, but then the other one I think is at least like thinking about what's wrong with it is a little more interesting. So the part that just seems kind of silly to me is saying, oh, but look, I and other pro-lifers are willing to make an exception for the life of the mother. And like, honestly, I think it was a lot easier to convince that people that like kind of adequately responded to it before all these states were able to ban abortion. And we kind of saw what that looked like in practice. Because I think if you're thinking about this in a very abstract way, it's easy to nod along for that. But then if you start thinking about, okay, wait a second, exactly how close to death's door do you need to get? And who gets to decide, what counts as an unsafe level for this to kick in? Then I think even a lot of people who might have gone along with that line earlier start to get a little bit more uncomfortable with it, right? I mean, we've seen some concrete cases of that in practice, right? So that's one point. But then I suppose you could maybe have like a very well-designed anti-abortion law that had like a nice big generously cut exception to that. But I suspect the Ben Shapiros of the world would object to that too, because it would let in too many things that they don't want to count. But like the thing that's more interesting to me is when he says, oh, well, sure, a bunch of women might die because they're not able to get abortions. And again, I mean, we've seen some examples of that since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. But overall, if you believe a fetus is like has the sort of same status as any other human life, then overall you're still saving more people than you're letting die by banning abortion. It's like, okay, that has a certain kind of internal coherence, but like I also think it really confronts us with some of the absurdity of the position, because it's like, do you really believe that like a first trimester fetus where there's like nothing resembling a working brain yet has the same moral status as like you and I do, as a pregnant woman does? I don't know. I would really question that. Like not just that, like, I don't happen to believe that, but like how much anybody really believes that, right? Like I mean, the sort of classic thing here is, if you had, if there was, I don't know, like the lab on fire and you have like 100 frozen embryos that are all going to get implanted, right? If you really believe life begins at conception, and you got to choose between saving that box with 100, frozen embryos in it and saving one, like, toddler, right? Like, would you really even hesitate before saving the toddler? Like, I kind of don't think anybody anywhere really would hesitate about that. I don't think that, like, it's very hard to really internalize the idea that like anytime you're after the moment of conception, that like that it counts, even if you're like super early in pregnancy. So that's one, and I even wonder about all this stuff about the exception for the life of the mother. It's like, because it's like, look, if you really believed that a fetus the whole time through has exactly the same status that a full-grown person does, I mean, I don't know. I wonder if in situations where a child who'd already been born was like where like an adult could only be saved by killing a child who'd already been born, like whether Ben Shapiro or anybody else would really be okay with that. I mean, I want, seems to me that maybe even that exception is kind of telling that it's like, no, you don't really accord this like quite the same status as like any other human being.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think he's pretty religious though. So I think like that's just the line he's going to take. But I mean, I agree when you get pushed far enough. I mean, it does seem like there's like even people who say that they believe it, you can maybe construct a scenario where their intuitions will be pumped otherwise, But I did want to just quickly say that I thought it was funny that like when he was saying like, oh, like I would, if you can show me, that like comprehensive sex education, like actually like reduces teen pregnancy or reduces pregnancies out of wedlock and like, but then it's funny that I was like, oh, okay. And then he added one more thing and was like value neutral or something. And I was like, what? I was like, what do you mean? I was like, that's so weird. I was like, it's like, why would it matter what the values are if it's getting the outcome that you want? It was just like a weird thing where it's like, where you kind of slip that in at the end and it made me kind of laugh.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's like, why? So you care about that so much that you would be willing to have more abortions, say, right? Because there's more pregnancies. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and like, I guess maybe the last point on this, the thing about, and yeah, it's so funny. It's like, does he really believe that it's like, like telling kids about contraception is like not going to have any effect on the rate of unwanted pregnancy? That seems so unlikely, but yeah, last point on this, maybe for me at least, is just that that last point about the forced motherhood. He's making like a very common slippage about this, but I think it's one that's always worth pointing out when he's saying, no, it's not forced motherhood because, I mean, he did it in the funny way, right? I didn't have anything to do with it, right? It's like, come on, what are you complaining about? I didn't knock you up, right? But as a response to the forced motherhood, it's like, oh, well, if you had something to do with the act that led to you becoming pregnant, that it's not forced motherhood, is just assuming something that's incredibly controversial and non-obvious, right? Which is that consent to sex is consent to pregnancy, which is, I guess consent to, keeping a fetus alive, that results from it. And like, why exactly should we assume that, right? I mean, like that, those are two really different things. I mean, this is, consenting to a course of action and consenting to doing something and then consenting to any particular course of action in response to something that happens as a result are normally separate. And certainly if you think about how consent works, it usually doesn't jump around between different parties like that, right? That it goes from your sexual partner to the fetus, right? That like, that's that's a strange, that's a strange leap, right? Like there might be many situations in which, the fact that like you had a voluntary role in letting a situation arise, doesn't necessarily mean that you've consented to respond to that situation in a particular way, right? I mean, like it's, it almost feels like a non sequitur to me. Like I, if you think abortion is murder, then you're not having anything to do with the situation coming up in which you're considering committing murder, like might not, fine, fair enough. Right. But like, I don't saying, oh, you consented to this rings very hollow to me. It's like, no, that's not what you consented for. Like clearly that's not, that's not what you, that's not what you consented to. Right. Like, I always think of, so there's this classic thought experiment from Judith Jarvis Thompson about the sick violinist that somebody is kidnapped and they wake up in a hospital bed and they're told that they've been hooked up somehow to this famous sick violinist to have, I don't even remember in the original how the story is filled out, but it's like whatever kidneys, blood, whatever it is, right? That you have to stay hooked up or else they'll die, right? It's the Society of Music Lovers has kidnapped you and hooked you up to the sick violinist. And a lot of people will say, okay, fair enough, but this only establishes that you should have, that the principle this establishes about, that like, which is what Judith Jarvis Thompson is trying to do with that example is say, oh, well, even if the pro-lifer could establish that the fetus has the same moral status as you or I do, they're only halfway done, because even once you've established that a fetus has a right to life, now you have two rights that are in conflict: a right to life for the fetus and a right to bodily autonomy for the mother. and you have to decide which right wins. And she says, well, you might think it's just obvious that the right to life sort of beats everything. You know, that's the trump card. That's the most important right. But then she brings up the sick violinist scenario as a case in which we might think that bodily autonomy beats even the right to life. And so a very common response to her article is to say, well, sure, maybe the sick violinist sort of principle would apply for pregnancy resulting from rape, but not if it results from consensual sex. But then again, you have all these issues about whether consenting to sex is consent to allowing any resulting pregnancy to go to term, you know, that. So like the sort of very silly way that often discussing this with students, you know, I'll kind of bring out the point is like, imagine that this Society of Music Lovers kidnapping wasn't a one-time thing. This was like a major social problem. You know, people were being kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers and hooked up to sick violinists. So, you know, you live in a neighborhood where there's like almost no Society of Music Lovers activity, but you move to a more dangerous one where it happens a lot more, you know, better nightlife there, your friends live there. But you don't want to be kidnapped. So, you know, you do the equivalent in this analogy of using protection, right? You know, you have a home security system, right? But look, if, you know, a really good kidnap team from the Society of Music Lovers gets through your home security system, or maybe even you stumbled home drunk one night and you forgot to turn it on, right? Like, do we really think that that means that you consented? Because you did move to the more dangerous neighborhood, right? Like, you know, you consented to an overall greater risk, but like this idea that voluntarily doing something with that lends itself to a greater risk of something happening adds up to consent to the thing itself is at the very least like very not obvious. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.